Read Me, Part 6. Written and narrated by KB Hurst. I sat next to Julia, who was quiet now. She kept looking at me, then back at the book. Julia was utterly fascinated by the book and how the pages came to life all on their own. Her dark eyes glimmered with awe as she looked at me. "Well, are you going to read that story you just staring at the book?" Julia asked. She was like a small child looking at it as she waited in anticipation. "Very well. I'm starting it now," I chuckled. The Lovers. Andrew and I had been in love for as long as I could remember. We were college sweethearts, and after a long courtship, we married in front of precisely 10 people at the courthouse. Andrew's family was non-existent. They didn't like the fact he had married beneath him, as they put it, some black woman. I was sure they called me other things, but none worth mentioning here. They never liked the fact that he had married a woman that wasn't white. My family wasn't very impressed with him either. My father, a lawyer in the South, warned me that white men weren't very impressed, and they only wanted a woman of color as some sort of exotic fetish. I rolled my eyes at him and his old school ways because Andrew was the love of my life and had gotten me through the death of my mother. He had helped me understand math when he tutored me in his college on his days off of football practice. We were eternal soulmates. I never saw Andrew raise his voice to me, even when I was unreasonable. I could be irrational, and often. I liked everything in our home to be a certain way. No mess, no dust. I suppose I was a little OCD at times. At the same time, Andrew was a hippie in a lot of ways. Loved his job at the bank as some high-powered finance guy, but he wore his hair long on the weekends, liked nothing more than being out in nature. He had only taken the job because he loved numbers. They fascinated him. I was content with my social work and sometimes art showings on the weekends with some fancy friends in New York City. We had, for all the barriers and obstacles, shared a very happy life and lived in our cocoon of happiness because it was like a fairy tale residing with him. He was a gentle soul, a happy, positive force of energy that kept my darkness at bay. He never let me go without a kiss, a smile, or an embrace. That was my beautiful Andrew. That is, until that fateful October when everything changed. I woke the morning my husband Andrew came in late. He had been on a weekend fishing trip with his friends in Canada. It was the 1980s, so long before cell phones and digital technology had him texting me to let me know he was on his way home. Instead, I woke to his shadow, standing over our bed. I woke in fright as Andrew stood over me. "Andrew?" "Bethany, I'm sorry. Did I wake you?" "Yes. Is everything all right? I wasn't expecting you till later this evening." "I'm just glad to be home," Andrew said. "Why don't you get your clothes off and climb into bed?" I told him. Andrew had stood there still, unwavering. "Andrew, please," I said, beginning to feel a bit unnerved by his standing over me. Andrew finally snapped out of his trance, took his clothes down to his tighty-whities, and climbed into bed next to me. There was something different, though. He was always wrapped his arms around me whenever we were in bed lying next to one another. This time, he simply laid flat on his back and appeared to be staring up at the ceiling. I knew something was wrong with my husband of 10 years. He had changed from the lively, happy-go-lucky man he was on Thursday morning when he had driven out of town with his friends Fred and Jerry, to early Sunday morning, listless, zombie-like, and depressed. It was as though something had taken my husband's happiness. When he finally went to sleep that night, he didn't wake up till nearly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I made him lunch and put his favorite coffee on to brew. When he came downstairs to the kitchen, I noticed there was a scratch on his neck. It snuck out from under his gray t-shirt. What happened to you? Huh? Your neck, what happened to you? Oh, tree branch. I ran into it. I could tell he was lying. I let it go, but still seemed out of it. So tell me about Canada. Did you catch any fish? I don't see your cooler. Don't tell me Jerry took it. Last time it was a month before you saw it again. Jerry didn't take it. I forgot about it. Forgot it? I bought that for you for our 5th wedding anniversary. Let it go, Bethany. Andrew got up and slammed his coffee down on the table and walked out. I was so taken aback by his sudden change in mood, I sat on the kitchen table staring at the food he had left. It remained untouched for the rest of the day. I was so mad at him for yelling at me the way that he had that I refused to cook dinner. Instead, I stayed outside, spending time raking leaves and getting the last of my garden ready for the winter that seemed closer than ever before. Over the next few days, I noticed that Andrew was slowly back to his usual self, but he still didn't mention Canada's trip. The trip was an annual fishing trip that Andrew and his 2 closest friends, Fred and Jerry, took every fall. They had gone 3 weeks later than usual this year because the cabin they rented was going under renovations. Andrew was helping me in the garden when I looked at him. Look at these mums. Do you think they could get any more beautiful? I asked him. Like you, he said calmly. I'm glad to see more of your old self. I missed you, I said, kissing his cheek. He smiled and hugged me tightly. It felt like he may break down if he held me any longer, and he let go of me abruptly. I need a glass of wine. Want anything? So early in the day? I asked him. It's for the weekend. Live a little. He smirked. Okay, only a little though, not too much. I haven't eaten anything today. You got it, he said. There was something in his eyes, a mischievousness I couldn't place. His eyes grew almost amber from the way they usually looked, which was a light brown. He came back out with a large glass for me and a glass of whiskey for himself. I said a small glass. Drink up. I sipped on the glass, then set it down on the back porch steps and continued my raking and pulling of dead underbrush. I said drink it. Andrew, I can't chug a glass of Cabernet. Fuck it, he said, and took the glass from me, then took it into the house. I was furious now. I wanted to know what happened on that trip. He was being utterly ridiculous. Look, I don't know what's gotten into your ass, but I'm sick of living with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. What happened on that trip? I know something happened. You've been different since you got home. Did you have a fight with Fred and Jerry? No, he said, sitting down at the kitchen table. What is it then? I don't want to talk about it. Andrew had never screamed at me like that before. I knew something happened. I just did not know what. There was a sudden knock at the front door. Are you expecting someone? I asked him, hoping he hadn't invited friends over for the football game and not warned me. Andrew shook his head at me. When I got to the door, there were 2 officers. Puzzled, I opened the door. Hello, can I help you? I asked. Yes, does Andrew Davidson live here? Yes, he does. That's my husband. May we come in and speak to him? I nodded and let them in. I walked over to Andrew, who was sitting with his glass of whiskey in hand. I touched his hand so he would put it down. Andrew, there are 2 police officers here to speak to you. He didn't seem shocked at all, which unnerved me even more. I followed him into the living room and sat down on the sofa. We're here about Fred Jarvis and Jerry Hellman. Are these 2 men friends of yours? I looked at Andrew, then growing even more worried than before. What the hell had happened on that fishing trip? Panic had risen inside of me. but I tried not to show it. I could hear my heart beating in my ears now, and found it hard to listen to everything that was coming out of my husband's mouth. Yes, I know them. They've been good friends of mine for the last several years. How can I be of assistance? Both of their wives reported them missing on the day they were to come back from your little fishing trip. They said you might know something odd. Neither one of their wives had your telephone number to call you, though, so they told us to check with you. Missing? Oh, it can't be right. Last time I saw them, I left them both at the lake and came home early. You can check with the owner of the cabin. I turned in my extra key the morning that I left. Oh, well, we'll look into that. So what did you fellas do all weekend? We fished, drank some beers. Did you drink a lot? No, just a few beers in between fishing, nothing crazy. Did anything happen that stands out as odd to you? Andrew looked down at the carpet and shook his head no. What's that? No, nothing odd stands out. Why did you leave your friends and go home early? I missed my bed, if I'm being honest. Sleeping in a small cabin with 3 old cots isn't my idea of restful sleep. My back has been acting up lately, so I just decided to come home. I found that statement odd. Andrew had never as much as complained about his back aching. Will you be around if we have any other questions? Asked one of the officers. Yeah, anything. Look, I hope you find them. This is as much a shock to me as it is their families, Andrew said, showing concern robotically. Thanks for your time. With that, the officers left. Okay, I want to know what happened on that trip, I said. I want you to shut your stupid flapping jaws. Andrew walked over to the refrigerator and pulled out a beer and opened it. He chugged the entire thing and then threw the can down at my feet. There, that is how you chug a drink. I began to cry. This was not my sweet Andrew. I walked out, taking the keys, and sped out of the driveway. I spent the entire day wandering around the park. I walked and walked until I couldn't walk anymore. It was growing dark out as it seemed to get darker earlier and earlier. When I pulled into our driveway, Andrew was sitting on the front porch in a wooden rocking chair that he had refurbished. All the lights were off in our house. The only light that had illuminated him was a small candle he had burning next to him. I got out of the car and walked towards the front of the house. Andrew stood up and walked towards me, kissing me passionately. I'm so sorry about my outburst. Something did happen on that trip. I don't know what it was. It all happened so fast. 1 minute Fred was there and Jerry and then something pulled them into the trees. Andrew was sobbing uncontrollably now. What are you talking about? Let's go inside. I sat him down on the couch. I took the glass of whiskey from his hand and sat it on the coffee table. Now run this by me again. Start from the beginning. Andrew nodded. We got to the cabin late this year, as you know. The owner was renovating the cabin. I nodded. Well, the day we got there, Fred started complaining of a nasty smell from near the cabin. We thought maybe it was garbage that didn't get picked up. When we got inside the cabin, everything was clean. It smelled like new oak and pine. There was a note from the cabin owner with his telephone number on it saying, "Hope we had another great stay." We unpacked. Fred forgot about the smell and we set to go fishing. Jerry had a good lead on where the best walleye were, so we took a nice walk towards the other side of the lake from where we normally fished. That's when Fred mentioned that he smelled that gross smell again. Maybe it was a skunk. I don't know. I asked, picturing old Fred complaining. No, it wasn't a skunk. Pretty soon we all smelled it. It got so bad we decided to go back to the cabin. When we got to the cabin, something had broken in. All of our stuff was strung about, our food was on the floor, and the refrigerator was wide open. My first thought was bears. So we gathered up what we could. None of the beer had been touched. Of course it hadn't. I chuckled. Andrew smiled at that too. Well, after we cleaned everything up and salvaged what we could, we decided that we would make some hot dogs on the fire. Jerry built a nice campfire and we roasted the weenies on the sticks we sharpened. It was the only food we had that hadn't been stolen. All the meat we had brought was gone. We didn't even have much luck trying to catch any fish since it had been so late in the season. Then what happened? I asked, wanting him to get to the point. Well, we sat out by the fire, making small talk. Jerry was complaining about his son's football coach benching little Jerry. Fred was smoking a cigar and drinking one of his shots of Stoli vodka. From out of nowhere, we all get a whiff of the smell again. It was so bad and was coming from above us. The fire went out, too, as though something blew it out. Then as we're all sitting there in the dark, something came down from the trees and pulled all three of us up into them. The last thing I heard was Fred screaming. Jerry's blood was on my face, then I got dropped by something. When I fell to the ground, I was so grateful that I found my car keys. I just got out of there as fast as I could. Whatever happened to them, I know they're both dead now. I'm not lying to you. That's where I got that scratch on my neck. My God. What could it have been? I asked, pulling down his shirt to get a good look at the scratch. I don't know. It had teeth. Big, huge teeth. And these yellow eyes. His jaws opened up wide like a shark. When it went to bite me, it pulled its head back like a snake, but it looked like a canine, not a snake. Then as it was cutting into me, it lost its grip on me, and that's when I fell to the ground and ran to the car. Andrew, we have to tell the authorities. For what? They'll never believe that monster took my friends. That is shit crazy people say, or shit a murderer makes up to seem crazy so they get out of going to jail. People are going to wonder what happened to Fred and Jerry. What if they think you did something to them? I was worried about him now. Leave it. There's no evidence, and I'm sure they'll never find any bodies. Whatever those things were, they're feeding into trees. I couldn't think anymore. I couldn't reason with him, and I wasn't sure if I should even believe my husband. He was acting so out of character. Phase 2. The next few days, Andrew was nearly back to his old self. He was grieving, I could tell, for the loss of his friends. I didn't bring up telling the police what happened anymore. I was hoping he would slowly come to that conclusion on his own. The sensitive, sweet Andrew I had grown to love with all of my heart and soul was no monster. Andrew did not lack empathy. If anything, it was the very essence of what a human being with empathy should be. Then, something happened. Andrew got very ill. He was sick. So sick. I woke one night to see him sweating with a fever of 104. We rushed to the emergency room, and when they saw his scratch, they deemed it as infected. It was filled with pus and blood that never seemed to heal. Andrew always had a silver necklace on of the Archangel Michael. The doctors and nurses had him remove it to stitch up his deep wound to clean it out. Within one moment of him removing the silver necklace, his wound had begun to heal. The doctor and 2 nurses chalked it up to fast acting on their part. I knew better. Something was wrong with Andrew. The removal of a holy object, and then it begins to heal? What was going on with my husband? In the next few days, I noticed Andrew didn't sleep all night. Instead, his entire sleep pattern was backward. He had begun taking time off work, which he had never done before. He had more energy at night like some crazy person. He would jog all hours of the night, and he chugged all these protein shakes. He claimed he was doing it for health reasons, but It was like Andrew craved something he wasn't getting. He would continuously eat when he wasn't up all night jogging. He would even buy raw steaks and eat them with salads, never cooking them at all. It grossed me out, and I was sure it had something to do with that wound he had suffered. The infection healed, and there was only a small trace of a scar where his injury had been. Yet, over the next few months, his behavior only got worse. Not only was he eating raw meat, staying up all hours of the night, but he had physical changes too. He was now working out, but his bulking up wasn't the only change. He had begun to grow hair all over his body. It was not just a little, it was growing thicker, and his eyes had this weird glow to them. I can't explain it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved Andrew with some muscle on his bones. He was quite sexy with the muscular frame. He was very into being as passionate as possible with me too. Yet, the hair was mildly concerning. It was now growing in thick amounts all over his body. Andrew didn't seem to notice it much. He was in a zone that I couldn't even explain. It grew worse by the 4th month. I woke to Andrew missing from our bed. When I got up to see where he had gone, I noticed something outside our bedroom window. There, crouched in our backyard, devouring some sort of raccoon, was my Andrew. He was tearing into it with his teeth, trying to claw at it with his bare human hands. I backed away from the window and went to lock the bedroom door. I was now afraid of my own husband. Somehow that night I fell asleep, clutching my pillow when there was a bang on the door. I sat straight up in bed. "Bethany! Bethany!" Andrew was now banging on the door. "Open it up! What's gotten into you? Open the damn door!" But I didn't want to open the door, but I was more afraid of what he might do if I didn't open it. When I opened the door, I nearly passed out from fright. What awaited me was a man, yellowish eyes, covered in black patches of hair all over his body, his t-shirt bloody. His teeth were a tiny bit larger, and his forehead now protruded like some madman in a horror movie. Yet the sound of his voice was very much that of my husband. "Why did you lock the door?" he asked with a sickening grin. I thought I heard something outside." "Silly woman. What do you want for breakfast? It's nearly 9 a.m. I'm not hungry. How about some coffee?" Coffee, yes, that sounds good." He pulled me down to the kitchen with his bloodied hand. "Andrew, you should let me make the coffee." "Why?" "You're covered in blood." Oh, shit. He was a nasty bugger. Tasted scrumptious, though. Maybe you should go shower. Yeah, you're right. I'll be back in a sec," Andrew said, kissing my cheek, and I cringed. I felt something on my cheek, and when I touched it, I realized it was blood. I began to cry. I was about to walk out of the house when I heard a loud crash coming from upstairs. Then I heard a loud, deep moan. "Andrew?" I called up to him. A muffled scream was coming from the bathroom. I crept slowly up the stairs, shaking. The entire time I kept seeing pieces of my life flash before my eyes. The day I met Andrew, he told his parents about me. Racist assholes. The day we got married. The day he came home from that fishing trip. And then the present. I wiped my tears, holding back a sob. I knocked on the door. No sound came, so I knocked again. Then the door opened with a bang, and I nearly fell down the stairs. What awaited me now was something out of The Howling. A tall, dark-haired thing with a man's body and head almost that of a wolf met me. I was now screaming. I didn't realize it was me doing the screaming because I was having an out-of-body experience. It wasn't here. This wasn't real. This could not be real. Its mouth opened wide, unlocking its jaws until the second set of jaws appeared. He was one split second away from swallowing me whole when the door to my home burst open and several police officers shot at Andrew. He fell over on top of me, and I could only lay there in shock, shaking violently. Finally, one of the officers came over to both of us very slowly. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I looked up at her. I didn't know what to say. I was covered in blood. As a female cop approached us both, I felt a jerk from Andrew's body, and he rose back to life, biting me on the neck in the last-ditch effort to have me all to himself. More gunshots rang out, and I realized I, too, had been shot. Together, Andrew and I lay in each other's arms, dead. There was a cover-up after, blaming it on a drug deal gone bad. The cops had a way of spinning the tale so that the government could hide the fact there were creatures out there like this. There was something demonic about them. One had possessed my husband and gotten us both killed. One thing I learned is that love never dies. A human heart can fill up so deep to the point where you can only hope that you both go simultaneously. Was it ideal for dying when we did? No, it wasn't. But I'm glad we went together. The gift of love, empathy, is essential in this dark world. If I could still love Andrew after what he did to me, killing me, then anything is possible. I closed the book. I looked over at Julia, who was sobbing now uncontrollably. I placed my hand on my friend's shoulder. "I think that's enough for now." Julia nodded. "Look, I need to call my daughter. It's been too long," I said to Julia. I let Julia rest on the couch, and I went to my bedroom to call my daughter, Emily. "Hey, Dad, it's late." "Sorry, Emily. I just wanted to hear the sound of your voice and make sure you were okay." "I'm doing okay." "Dan and I are separating." "What?" "I just need to take a break. We're too different." "Do you love him?" I asked her. "Very much." "Then take it from an old man. Talk to him." "He loves you, Emily." "I don't think he wants to talk to me. We had a nasty fight last night." "Well, love conquers all, as they say." "Oh, Dad." She laughed. "Trust me. Wake him up with coffee and donuts. He's a cop. Cops love donuts." "He just hasn't been the same since that killing of that kid. Everyone is on edge, and it was so sad. He had been trying to find the killer. They're hoping that they have a lead. You know, it really gets to him, this job." "Then all the more reason to show him some empathy, Emily." "You're right, Dad. I'll try to listen to him more." "How'd you get so wise, anyhow?" "It's a gift." I chuckled. When I went back down to check on Julia, she was curled up on my couch, sound asleep. The README book lit up as I approached it. I turned to a page and opened wide up to the next chapter. And I sighed. The Crystal Skull. Soon, book, soon. But tonight, I rest.